It's just a really neat way to, explore some ideas if you're actually working with experts, right? Like us, that can analyze a lot of that and help show you without trying to sell you. Let's just look at, like I said, pen to paper and see what the math suggests.
Brian, in our pre-recording talk, you mentioned good, bad news. Do you want to share with us what good, bad news is?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is bad news for folks that are affected, right? But the good part of the bad news is that so employment came in higher than expectations just this week. It was only a tenth, but it's significant because it starts to show, hopefully, a sign of inflation. I know that also sounds a little counterintuitive, but as inflation starts to improve, so do mortgage rates, right? And everything else that's along with that. So the anticipated number, I believe, was 3.8%, and it came in at 3.9% as far as the unemployment rate. That's the highest it's been since August of 2023. And bonds, meaning mortgage prices, reacted quite favorably this week in that news. So again, I don't wish ill will on anybody that's losing jobs, but it's neat to see that we're finally starting to get accurate data, if that makes sense. So I'm going to keep my conspiracy theory thoughts out of our video here for sure, but like there's finally some accuracy, I think, is what they're finding, and that's positive news for mortgage prices.
Well, to dive into a little bit what you were kind of alluding to there is, I know that these numbers come out in these big reports and there's a lot to them, right? And so there's the expectation of what we might see in a report, and then there's after people have had a chance to kind of comb through these reports, there's some adjustments made. And what we've seen in the past is that there were a lot of extra jobs, second and third jobs that people were taking on, included in those numbers where the number of jobs was going up. This obviously is, you're speaking to unemployment, so it's a little bit different. But those numbers, I mean, something has to give, obviously, for inflation to go down. And obviously the reason we started with this tidbit of news is because that is what drove rates down this week, ultimately, which was a nice reprieve, because unfortunately rates had been creeping up over the last couple of weeks and put us right about 7.5, and now they're settling down a little closer to 7. And again, we quote rates here only just to say that if you've got to find out what you qualify for and what rate actually applies to you in your given situation. But generally speaking, that's kind of where we're at. Brian, what else was valuable to talk about in the news that we saw that it kind of been affecting rates? It's worth bringing up here.
I've had this scenario happen, and I believe that we've spoken about this before, but just to put it into context, because it was fresh in my mind, we've done quite a few of these transactions lately where think of it as like a reverse cash out, right? Normally folks are taking cash out of their properties to, pay bills or do home improvements or whatever the case may be. But I've got quite a few families lately, or people, or whatever the case is, whether they're married or not, I guess it doesn't matter, but that are looking to get out of trouble, maybe that they've gotten themselves into from a credit standpoint, whether it's auto loans or, credit cards. The scary thing right now is that credit card balances are at an all-time high, as are credit card interest rates. So, we're going through and saying, let's look at selling. Let's keep some of the cash. Let's use that cash to fast forward and pay some things off and or down. And let's do maybe a less down payment than we maybe had anticipated on the new house. By the time we crunch all those numbers, it's pretty eye-opening to see what sort of an advantage somebody.
What's interesting about equity is it's sort of like, it's not, I mean, it's real money if you cash out, right? But it's unrealized dividends, essentially, if you just leave it in place. And for you to be able to access that potentially, what you've made over the past several years, take that out of the house, especially if you choose to buy and sell a property. When you sell, you cash that out, you redirect some of that money towards some of the real life issues that demand real life money. And you can take some of that equity that you earn just by having your house, take care of some of those issues that might have accrued over time. So that's good. You said you've helped several people in that situation.
At least a half dozen over the last few weeks here. Yeah. There's a gal that I spoke to just today that's looking to write up an offer. She was convinced she had to put 20% down because she wasn't a first-time home buyer. We reworked everything so that she's putting about 5% down, wiping out about $55,000 worth of debt, which is north of $2,800 a month in minimum payments.
Wow.
The average to pay that off is 39 years if we look at the minimum payment. So regardless of what it seems like on the surface from watching too much television, if we were to actually put pen to paper and analyze these scenarios, she's way further ahead by having a such cooler house than keeping the massive minimum payments and the house that they just sold. So it's just a really neat way to, explore some ideas if you're actually working with experts, right? Like us, that can analyze a lot of that and help show you without trying to sell you. Let's just look at, like I said, pen to paper and see what the math suggests. Neat way to look at it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think we all are familiar with the headlines over the past couple of years. Rates have doubled, and that's what everyone's hearing, and that's what everyone's paying attention to. The untold story, I do believe, is, don't forget about the equity that a lot of people have earned, and kind of like what I was saying. And then you take that equity and turn it into something that could really get you out of a tight situation, or you could use it for all kinds of different reasons. But that's the story that we're not hearing enough of, and it's good to hear that there are people taking advantage of that, because that's a real scenario. Those are real people that you're helping. And when you think about what are the headlines related to 2024 and interest rates and whatnot, you're not hearing a lot of the good things that are happening with people taking advantage of their equity.
And
Brian,
along the same lines, interest rates may have doubled, but so have credit card interest rates or more, right? So those are really, really tough for a lot of families right now.
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yep. It's about all I've got for now. We'll probably want to look at things at the end of next week. Again, there's a lot of information coming out next week. I'm reading some of the headlines coming up, and it looks like it could be relatively volatile next week without knowing exactly what's going to happen. CPI comes out, like I said, which is the core, the consumer price index. Right? That's the core number that the Fed looks at from an inflation measurement tool, I suppose. So, we can reconnect next week and look at that. A couple other highlights and pieces of information that come out next week. So we'll want to keep an eye on those things.
Whether we have a mortgage minute or we don't, the rates go up and the rates go down. They're going to do that next week. They might have gone up or down just since we've been talking here. And, obviously our job is to bring you the information and the news that we think is most relevant to kind of the trends that we're seeing, whether that trend is upwards or downwards. And as you said, a volatile week ahead, but we will seek to bring you the information you need to know. Until next week, Brian, I appreciate you being on here today.
Anytime. Thanks again for hosting.
Yep, we'll see you.
Yeah.